Sorry, I'm gonna try that again. I got distracted by horses. There are horses and it messes with my brain. Hey, it's Matt. I'm in Granada, Nicaragua with a couple of my friends, and I've been trying to do a 10-minute Bible hour every single week, whether it neatly fits my schedule or not. And so here we are in Nicaragua, and we're gonna talk about something totally unrelated to Nicaragua in any way. And by that, I mean Breaking Bad. Breaking Bad is a television show that's on television that some people might find offensive because things happen in it that could be found offensive. Please don't watch it unless you're a mature audience member and appreciate things like Breaking Bad. So in this show, there's a character named Ted, and Ted is someone who a couple of other characters need to have a sit down with. So they send a couple of heavies over to Ted's place. He tries to run away from them in a panic, and he slips on a rug and almost kills himself. And when the heavies call their boss to say what happened, they're like, no, we know you told us not to hurt him, and we didn't hurt him. It was an act of God, man. And the other guy's like, yeah, act of God. What could you do? In that context, act of God means a thing that nobody could help. But in the most literal sense, an act of God would be something very intentional. Something where God had a plan and an idea and a motivation to advance that plan, and so then he just went out and did something that would accomplish that. And the passage we're going to look at in Acts chapter 12, verses 19 through the end of the chapter, is a very dramatic story that all of the original audience would have known, or at least they would have known the headlines version, that Luke attributes to God as an act of God in the unfolding of his sovereign plan. So picking it up in 12:19, it says, Then Herod went from Judea to Caesarea and stayed there a while. Verse 20, he'd been quarreling with the people of Tyre and Sidon, and they now joined together and sought an audience with him. Having secured the support of Blastus, a trusted personal servant of the king, they asked for peace because they depended on the king's country for their food supply. So you might feel like the Bible is an elegant book where each and every phrase, sentence, could be extracted and distilled to something that could go on a greeting card or that could be used to guide your behavior. I defy you to find a way to make chapter 12, verse 20 of Acts into a greeting card. It's just historical details. So if there's no sentimental value and there's no value in shaping your behavior, and really there's no immediate obvious value in revealing things about the nature of God, why does Luke include details like this? Why does he insist on it? Well, I think it's very important to understand that Luke was not writing to you and me. I think he'd be fine with us listening in, but Luke was writing to his contemporaries, people who were alive at the same time as him. And so when he wrote this, he's trying to say it in a way that will cause people to connect the dots. People who've heard all about what happened with Herod and how things went with his terribly interesting trade negotiations with Tyre and Sidon, and what went down when he went up to have these negotiations in Caesarea. And he's trying to cause people to understand that there's a story they've heard, but now they're going to get the rest of the story. One other note before we move on. This takes place in Caesarea, and just in case you're thinking to yourself, Caesarea, I don't know anything about that. I don't practice Caesarea. I ain't got no crystal ball. I made a video all about that you can go and watch now. Verse 21, on the appointed day, Herod, wearing his royal robes, sat on his throne and delivered a public address to the people. They shouted, "This is the voice of a god, not of a man." Josephus, interestingly, gives us an account of this exact same event. And I'm gonna put a link down in the description where you can go and read his specific account. Now, Josephus was writing as a Jewish historian a little bit after the fact, who was trying to placate his Roman overlords who he had sort of traitored over to. So his view of the world and his motivation for writing is a little different than Luke's, but their accounts align in that this was a regal moment. Herod is going to go out and proudly celebrate what he's accomplished as president and score some Herod cred, the same way that someone who has just achieved a great political victory or brokered a treaty at Camp David might have a gloating celebration to show to the media what they had just accomplished. And everybody's really excited about this, and as Herod gleams in his silver gilded regal outfit, people are cheering, "This is the voice of a god." What's up, guys? You don't have to run away. And before we get into verse 23, I've got to tell you, the original audience would have been completely prepared to just finish the story. They all know the story. In the same way, if I told you a story about a great president at the height of his popularity, who with his young, beautiful wife traveled from Washington, D.C. to downtown Dallas, Texas, to go on a drive in his convertible by a book repository and a grassy knoll, you would know what happens next. So, all of these people know that what happens next is a monarch who ruled over them is going to die in spectacular fashion. Verse 23, immediately, because Herod did not give praise to God, an angel of the Lord struck him down, and he was eaten by worms and died. We're getting the inside scoop from Luke. Everybody knows that he got sick and died somehow, but Luke is literally attributing this to, as we discussed at the beginning of the video, an act of God. God meant to do this. There was judgment, there was punishment that was going on, and it happened. And you don't get the impression that there's a tremendous amount of somberness or regret on the part of Luke. Though I wouldn't say he's exactly gloating or reveling in the guy's death either. Once again, just as in the case of Ananias and Sapphira, Luke goes with the approach of just telling it straight. This happened, this happened, this happened, this happened, and that's the way the whole thing went down. And when I've read and listened to people talk about verse 23, there's all kinds of pages of speculation about what this disease was or how he died. I'm gonna let you know a little secret. I completely don't care what the mechanics or physics of this disease were. What we know is that he was struck down, and a few days later, he actually died from the thing. If we're to be honest about this, 21st century sensibilities are in friction with this a little bit. We don't like the idea of a God who judges things or who would carry out justice in such a way that we might be uncomfortable with. There's a steamroller, like literally. Other than a freight train, like the thing that would be emblematic of a big, loud, noisy, clunky thing rolling through and disrupting my attempt to film something, is happening right now. And you'd think that I would just stop and start over to get a better take, but I'm not going to do that. I got a sneaking suspicion you enjoyed the steamroller as much as I did. Verse 24, but the word of God continued to increase and spread, and when Barnabas and Saul had finished their mission, they returned from Jerusalem, taking with them John, also called Mark. Just like with the account of Ananias and Sapphira earlier in Acts, a big public judgment happens, everybody hears about it, and we're moving right along. It's not a point of celebration, it's not a point of great regret. Rather, it's the kind of thing that people look at and say, well, we've seen God physically active in the world. We've seen him take on human form and be here and coexist with us. We've seen miraculous things happen left and right. They weren't surprised at all that God was continuing to be active. And it was, in a way, business as usual. All right, well, God's cleared the slate. He's bought us a little time to get our feet underneath us in Jerusalem. Maybe they would be thinking in their heads what Jesus said to them about how he'd be with them always to the end of the age. Does God get to be a judge in this world? Well, as much as it might make us uncomfortable, and don't get me wrong, it does make me uncomfortable, I don't think we have any say whatsoever in that. We can say, well, I don't like your God if he would do something like that to a king just because that king didn't like a religion that you like. Well, you can say that, but if there's really a God who's really all-powerful and can really do what he wants, then I guess our opinion doesn't matter very much. I will tell you this, that should not be taken as license for us to go and engage in violence, saying, oh, I'm pretty sure this is what God would want me to do, and then behaving like an idiot or doing something horrible. But I've dealt with that observation enough. Second thing, again with the book of Acts, it is important to understand that most of this is not prescriptive, either in that the sense that it's telling us to do something, or in the sense that it's giving an example of how things will always be forever. How many other people do we see both in the Bible and outside the Bible who've persecuted Christians and lived long, happy, wealthy lives, even got more power because they persecuted Christians? Here, I think we see a specific moment where the church was in jeopardy, the roots weren't down deep, and God had said, through this church, this redemption thing is gonna happen. He couldn't let the church sink, so he couldn't let Herod sink the church or punish it to the point that it couldn't function anymore. That's why I think what we're seeing here is not prescriptive, but instead an example in an unfolding history of God acting in a way that made sense for His plan and His designs at that moment. Okay, it's getting dark, so I'm going to wrap this up. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour from Granada, Nicaragua, where there's now this beautiful lake breeze blowing in, and my goodness, it's pleasant. I'm going to go get a bite to eat and enjoy this place a little bit. If I've earned your subscription, you like what's going on with the show, take a minute, please subscribe, pass it along to a friend, and I'm going to come back to the United States, film some more stuff. We'll see you there. Take care.